On April 18, 1943, 4 boys were playing in the forests of Hagley Wood near Wychbury Hill in Worcestershire, England. Bird nesting was the activity they engaged in. A well-liked activity among the youth of that era was climbing trees where birds had made their nests, where boys would lay eggs and collect a vast collection of distinctively blue and speckled individuals. The boys were in the woods at one stage and stumbled upon a particularly large wych elm, which is favored by birds for nesting purposes. Among the young men, Robert Farmer stood out as the most robust climber, just like him who scaled the trunk and swam among the branches to find their way around in search of a nest. After doing so, he observed that the tree's trunk was hollow and went several feet downwards. Vainly he gazed into the hole and was met with an unexpected sight that made him feel extremely cold. A skull that had human hair and teeth was present. Upon realizing what he was looking at, Robert almost fell from the tree. But his situation was extremely dire as Hagley Wood belonged to the state of Haglia, and Lord Cobham's land was being trespassed upon by the boys. Sharing their past experiences with others could result in parents discovering their whereabouts, which could cause more trouble than it caused. The boys departed Hagley Wood abruptly, visibly shaken and pale, and immediately returned home to their parents before they began to wonder where they had gone. The boys, including Thomas, were visited by vivid and terrifying nightmares that haunted them all. He witnessed visions of the woman trapped in the wych elm, still alive and wailing as the tree encircled her, holding her like a terrible wooden prison. He tried to help, but couldn't. When she screamed for help, his voice was caught in his throat, and he went silent. He cried out as he woke up from his nightmare, and when his parents came to see what had upset him, announcing everything, he informed them about Hagley Wood as it approached the birds, but most importantly, he told them of the trapped skeleton inside the wych elm. Thomas's parents arrived at the local police station the next morning to inform them of their son's alleged discovery. The constables delved deeper into the hollow trunk and discovered an almost complete skeleton concealed in the wych elm as described by the boys. Along with some clothing fragments that were thought to be from the deceased, they also discovered the woman's golden wedding ring. The skull was regarded as an important piece of evidence, just like the one young Robert Farmer had witnessed, and still had a fairly complete dental pattern and some hair that had fallen off his head. Responding constables searched the area for more clues as to who or why the woman's body had been buried inside the hollow, and after doing so they discovered the remains of a human hand hidden among piles of dirt and leaves not too far from the tree. The woman's hand was cut off by someone before being hurled into the empty trunk, as discovered by the police in no time. A later forensic analysis quickly revealed that the woman had been buried in the wych elm and had not lived beyond 18 months, which meant that she was murdered in October 1941. The examination chamber uncovered a taffeta fragment in her mouth, which indicated that her obsession may have been the cause of death. A silk and polyester blend known as taffeta creates a soft and airy appearance. Due to its ability to maintain shape better than many other fabrics, this fabric is considered a premium choice for ball gowns and wedding dresses. The murderer is likely a skilled dresser or person of means who could afford to purchase expensive textiles. Furthermore, the coroner concluded that the wych elm was likely placed in the hollow when she was freshly killed due to the measurements of its trunk, which could not have been fit into it after the rigor mortis had occurred. By examining the different objects found near the corpse, law enforcement could accurately determine the woman's potential appearance. The Second World War was characterized by high levels of casualties, leading to the disappearance of numerous civilians due to German bomb ratings and extensive records that were too large for them to identify. Despite cross-referencing hundreds of reports of missing persons, nothing seemed to match. Also, dentists from all over the United Kingdom was contacted with the intention to identify the pattern of the woman's teeth, which is known as the bite in dentistry circles. The woman's unique tooth pattern has not been identified in any of their records. The public was disturbed by the strange case, as they were interested in learning about the woman's murder and had a strong interest in the matter. In 1944, the year when their demands for answers were at their peak, A graffiti on the small obelisk near where Bella was found had read, "Who kept her under the arm of witches?" The murder's unresolved nature would remain a mystery for the rest of the years. But this is not surprising. The question of the elusive and perplexing nature of murder was not a primary concern for national or local police forces, as the British state's human resources were stretched to their limits in its efforts to combat Nazi wrongdoing throughout mainland Europe. Despite the passage of almost 80 years, we are still grappling with the question of who was responsible for placing the woman's corpse in the witch arm of Hagley Wood. The body's location and the person who owned it are both a subject of many prevailing theories. The body could have been that of Birmingham prostitute, who was not reported missing until 1944, but had disappeared 3 years prior. According to the report, Lubella was identified, which leads us to a disturbing realization that the person who labeled himself as such on the scruffy obelisk must have been aware of her identity, or that of the killer, long before she was ever officially recognized. Jack Massop, a patient of the mental hospital staff, is another theory. The hospital staff was frequently informed by Massop that he had nightmares about a woman who was staring at him from. Jack passed away before the body was ever found, but 10 years later, at a time when the Wych Elm story was deeply ingrained in public, his wife disclosed that he had been involved. A public house in Hagley was where Unamusa's husband and he had been drinking, and she told her that they were being pressured by an intoxicated woman to buy her a drink. In the aftermath of her vomiting in the back seat, the men gave her a ride home and then took her into the woods to learn how to behave. They also tried to scare her by throwing her drunken body into an empty trunk, hoping to make her realize her mistake. Unless they had killed her first or she had died of exposure while stuck in the hollow trunk, there is no proof that the horrors of an insane individual were real, and he was eventually placed in a mental institution. If that is the case, then why did they cut off her hand before doing that? In spite of this, a second theory was put forward by Margaret Murray, an anthropologist and archaeologist from University College London in 1945. The theory proposed by Professor Murray is the most unsettling of all the theories regarding Bella's disappearance and death, as it involves something that was believed to be completely gone by the British Isles. Professor Murray stated that the removal of Bella's hand would align with the ritual of the Hand of Glory, which could have been carried out by a group of local gypsies. A candle made up of dead body parts and placed in a severed hand was believed to be incredibly potent and powerful, according to old European tradition. The Hand of Glory would make anyone who received it immobile. The only way to extinguish a candle was with milk, and the deceased's hair was utilized as wick, with the light being directed solely to the person holding it. Professor Murray's claims about the death and dismemberment of Bella were contradicted by her linking the murder to the slaying of Charles Walton, who was similarly murdered in a ritualistic manner near Quentin. Charles Walton, who was 75 years old, had been attempting to prune hedges and engage in other gardening activities on Valentine's Day of 1945 when he was approached by an unknown perpetrator. Dr. Walton had punched the murderer with his own walking stick, then used a slash hook to cut off his neck and drive his pitchfork prongs into his throat, ultimately leaving him unconscious. The area where Mr. Walton was located remained undiscovered, despite numerous thorough searches, as his left hand had been severed. Following his dispatch to investigate the grisly murder, Detective Superintendent Robert Fabian of the Metropolitan Police wrote about his findings. If anyone has entertained the idea of black magic, witchcraft, or shamanism, I suggest they remember Charles Walton and his death as the tragic culmination of a pagan rite. The argument for staying away from the villains with their swords, incense, and mumbo-jumbo is sound. This decision can have a significant impact on your future peace of mind and life. Many Quentin residents, as per Fabian's account, believed that Walton was a witch with supernatural powers that some villagers were afraid of. He was accused of using the evil eye and keeping natterjack toads as pets to damage local farmers' crops and livestock. The failure of the 1944 harvest was just one example that locals have cited. Allegedly, the alleged witchcraft led to his assassination, in an act of ritualistic decease that involved his blood being soaked in the garden to replenish soil fertility, and his hand being taken for a ceremonial gesture of giving thanks. Detective Superintendent Alex Spooner, who leads Warwickshire CID, was tasked with investigating the murder alongside Robert Fabian. It was reported that Spooner had referred Fabian to a book called Folklore, Old Customs and Superstitions in Shakespearean Land. Reverend James Harvey Bloom authored the work, which was published in 1929. A ghostly black dog was reportedly summoned by a young plowboy on multiple occasions in 1885, and the story was told through an apparently true story. It was reported that Fabian was so shocked that he couldn't believe the name of this plowboy, who was actually Charles Walton. During his later years, Fabian implied that he had been subjected to a barrage of silence in his investigation into the murder case. He revealed to reporters in 1945 that the inhabitants of Upper and Lower Quentin and the surrounding region were secretive and did not shy away from approaching strangers. The two ritualistic murders are not known for certain whether they were connected, but the fact that they occurred within a short span of time is crucial to understand. The notion that Bella was murdered because of her involvement in a German spy network has been refuted since the 1970s. It is the only one that has not been completely rejected, except for the one with occult significance. It is possible that Bella was murdered in an ancient pre-Christian ceremony, similar to Charles Walton's death. However, it remains unclear who removed her hand before putting her warm body inside and the witch elm of Hagley. Isdalen, also known as Ice Valley, is a location in western Norway near the city of Bergen, Death Valley or Dødsdalen. The name Death Valley was given because of the abundance of steep cliffs that were recognized by the Nordic people in another era. A ritual, known as senicide, was conducted in these areas where older individuals who were no longer capable of caring for themselves and considered a burden could participate. The decision to assist older individuals in climbing the Etishtupa mountains and burying themselves in the valley below was made with the intention of achieving a swift and painless end, but their fear of death prevented them from carrying on with this ritual. It was in this somber and gloomy environment that one of Norway's fathers decided to take his two daughters on a hiking trip in November 1970. The trio was walking towards the restaurant on the highest point of Bergen, while they explored the well-known trails of Ulriken, the tallest of the 7 mountains that surrounded the city. As the man's daughter was ascending, she sensed a burning scent emanating from close by, but they were not high enough to identify it as the restaurant, prompting the trio to search for clues. The sight of a girl hovering over her eyes caused her to scream with horror at the smell. A woman's body, lying face up on her back, is charred beyond recognition in the midst of a heap of broken rock fragments at the base of an overgrown mountain cliff. The 3 individuals quickly made their way back to the town, frantically notifying the local police department about their discoveries. The 2 young girls, deeply affected by what they saw, returned home to their mothers and were accompanied by the father as the police investigated where the woman's burned body was located. When the police arrived at the scene surrounding the woman's body, they noticed several items that appeared to have been set up in a very specific way. All of them had burn scars, implying that they were exposed to the same fire that had scorched the woman's body. The items in the package were a few pieces of jewelry, earwear, gloves, boots, nylon stockings, purse, plastic passport case, 2 plastic water bottles, umbrella, cheap liquor bottle empty, matchbox, and sleeping pills. The body was found with gasoline-like stains on the fur beneath it. Personal identifiers were removed from all the items, as reported by the police. A couple of days later, it was discovered that 2 suitcases had been left at Bergen railway station. The staff inspected a set of travelers' luggage that seemed to be typical. A purse containing currency from 2 European countries was found inside, along with clothes and cosmetics. The items were unusual, as all the brand names and personal identifiers had been removed or scratched off. Among the items was also a notepad with what seemed to be an encrypted message. The local police were informed that the woman in the fire must have had ownership of both suitcases. The question of who she was and why someone would choose to travel anonymously remained unanswered. The autopsy results at Auckland University Hospital revealed that the mysterious woman had died from a combination of causes. Initially, an examination of her blood and stomach revealed that she had breathed in a lethal dose of carbon monoxide and had taken approximately 60 sleeping pills, which exceeded the recommended daily dosage for barbiturate. Nevertheless, it was discovered that her lungs contained a significant quantity of suture, suggesting that she had been breathing when she was placed in the inexplicable fire. The bruises on her neck suggest that she had been struck or held tightly by someone, possibly to push her into the flames. Due to her identity being unknown at the time, tissue samples were taken, and her teeth had gold fillings that were uniquely patterned. The expectation was that someone in Dennis could identify the work and reconstruct her identity. A national appeal was made to the Norwegian public for information on the woman's whereabouts and identity, as they were still far from being able to identify her. National newspapers and TV stations quickly published composite sketches of the woman's face, which were based on forensic analysis. Afterward, the staff of the Hotel Horde Hyman in Bergen recognized the woman from the sketches. The woman was spotted on November 23rd after exiting room 407. The police were informed that the woman was a lovely person, aged between 30 and 40, who was approximately 5 feet tall, had dark brown hair, and eyes that were of the same hue. She had portrayed herself as a salesperson who was on the move, dealing in rare antiques and artifacts. Furthermore, they observed that she seemed extremely anxious, clinging onto her room and hardly communicating with other guests or the hotel staff. According to a particular staff member, she was almost certain that the woman speaking in German when she conversed with another guest. They also remarked that she habitually paid for things in cash and once asked to change rooms, but gave an untruthful explanation as to why. While the initial information was being disclosed, Norwegian homicide detectives were also exploring the encrypted message in the woman's notepad. The codes were believed by cryptologists to be a list of the places that the woman had visited, along with dates and times. The detectives were able to make up their minds after cross-examining handwritten checks and forms at different hotels, which indicated that the mystery woman had traveled extensively throughout Europe under false names and claimed to be a Belgian citizen. A second set of hotel staffers came forward not long after, but this time they accused the blonde woman of speaking fluently while having a one-time conversation with another guest. The case was expected to remain unsolved, with no hope of identifying the woman after months of inquiry and extensive resources. The authorities were compelled to conclude that the burned woman had committed suicide due to excessive consumption of sleeping pills, despite overwhelming evidence. On February 5th, 1971, the woman who had been burned was buried in an unmarked grave in Bergen's Mollendal Cemetery, with only a few members of the Bergman police station present, and it seemed as though all her secrets would be interred with her. Several theories and developments emerged that could provide more insight into the individual and circumstances of her sudden and violent death. The cover-up initiated by the Norwegian National Criminal Investigation Service was suspected by some individuals shortly after her death, owing to the highly suspicious nature of the incident. As the incident occurred during the height of the Cold War, some speculate that the woman was a spy, and that her possession of 9 fake passports indicates their involvement in an extremely powerful and well-organized group. It is possible that the woman's murder was connected to a range of other mysterious events that occurred in Norway during the 1960s. The incidents occurred in close proximity to a military base, and they have been definitively connected to global spy activities. The woman's movements across Europe were found to be closely linked to secret tests of the Penguin missile, as revealed by declassified Norwegian national defense records. The Norwegian fisherman's eyewitness testimony is said to corroborate this, who has alleged that he came across composite sketches of the woman, having witnessed her during military exercises in the vicinity of Stavanger, Norway. A witness finally provided the most crucial insight after 35 years of accumulating half-truths and dead ends. In 2005, a Bergen resident disclosed that they had seen one of the composite sketches made in the early stages of recovering the burned body's remains. They said the drawing of the woman's face looked unbelievably similar to that of a woman he had seen 5 days before her burn to death. While hiking on a different mountain called Fløyen in the vicinity of Bergen, he came across someone wearing an unusual outfit. A woman dressed in light, casual clothing was observed by hill hikers, rather than the usual warm and waterproof outdoor attire. The man testified that she appeared resigned, even melancholic, and briefly assumed the role of possibly saying something to him, but she never did. The man noticed that the woman was being trailed by 2 men wearing warm, heavy coats that looked like they had been brought to a foreign place. The man responded by saying that they had dark hair and dark eyes, and the conversation was so intense that it felt like he was speaking to them right away, but they quickly stopped when they noticed him walking uphill. After the national inquiry was launched, the man stated that he had approached the police to report the encounter, but were visited by senior Norwegian security officers who instructed him to disregard his observations. The man's narrative provides substantial support for the notion that the Isdal woman's death was concealed, given the overwhelming evidence that she was murdered and had not taken her own life. The Isdal woman has left many questions unanswered, and it seems that the chances of having answers to these questions are diminishing over time. It is clear that she didn't die on her own accord. Typically, those who commit suicide leave a note of explanation, either to beg for forgiveness or to acknowledge that their loved ones may have been affected by their actions. It is always a one-off event. They do not have any spare garments on hand. Their possessions are not stripped of any identification marks, and they certainly do not self-immolate when they are incapacitated. It is safe to assume that the Isdal woman was murdered, but it is becoming increasingly evident that someone or some group has taken all possible actions to bury the investigation and reveal the truth about her identity. Amy Pitson was due to give birth to her firstborn in Aurora, a sleepy suburb of Chicago, in 2004. After much discussion, she and her husband James decided to name the boy Timothy. The boy's first 6 years were filled with happiness and lack of drama, and we can confidently say that he was loved and looked after by his 2 young parents. His extended family came to him regularly, and they looked after the boy as much as his parents did. But Timothy and his family were on the brink of a tragedy that would beg the questioning and confusion among those who encountered it, even today. On May 11, 2011, James Pitson woke up, had breakfast with his son, and then drove the boy to his kindergarten class at Greenman Elementary School on West Galena Boulevard before heading to work. Shortly after 8 a.m., Amy Pitson arrived at the school and informed one teaching staff member that there was a family emergency and that she had to take Timothy out of the building for the day. After wishing her well with any emergency, Timothy's kindergarten teacher instinctively obliged his mother to let him leave the class and travel with him wherever she went. Despite the apparent family emergency, Amy Pitson was not aware of her whereabouts until she reached an automobile repair shop in Aurora at approximately 10 a.m. on that morning. Pitson and her son were taken to the Brookfield Zoo by a cordial shop employee, where they spent the rest of the day and early afternoon unwinding in one of its animal exhibits. After arriving back at the vehicle repair shop around 3 p.m., Amy and her son drove to the Lime Cove Resorts in Gurnee, a small town in Lake County that is famous for its large water park and 6-foot flag company. Amy and her son spent the night at a resort after taking Timothy around the water park, departing the next day before driving over state lines to Wisconsin. Around 10 a.m., they were recorded on CCTV cameras at the Kalahari Resorts and the Wisconsin Dells. Timothy Pitson had disappeared without any indication of his high or hair, for all intents and purposes. Amy Pitson contacted some of her family, including her brother-in-law and mother, through phone calls made around lunchtime on May 13th. She reassured them that they were not to worry, as she and Timothy were both safe and healthy, and neither of them were in danger. The relatives would eventually verify that Timothy was with his mother during the call-up because it could be heard in the background complaining of being hungry. Cell phone records revealed that the calls were made from an area near Sterling in Vernon County, Wisconsin. and they were apparently on their way again via Route 40 during the investigation. Despite what may have been expected, Amy Pitson did not reach out to her spouse, the person you would expect to hear from her to inform you about her and her son's location. James had been frenzied since the evening of May 11th, when he returned home to find that his wife had taken Timothy out of school. On May 13th, Amy Pitson was caught on camera by security cameras inside a Winnebago family dollar store. She bought a notebook, stationery, and envelopes when she went out alone. She was still alone when she was spotted in a store at Sullivan's Food in Winnebago, Wisconsin, where she apparently went to the pharmacy counter and quickly left. It was only on the 11th of that night that she appeared again, having checked into a room, the Rockford Inn, and the city of Rockford, after returning to Illinois. On May 14th, the next day, a housekeeping employee arrived at the end of the night and went to clean Amy Pitson's room. The door had no "Do Not Disturb" signs on it, and when the housekeeper knocked, nobody was present to answer. Against her wishes, she unlocked the room and entered it. She was horrified to find Amy Pitson lying on blood-soaked sheets with her face raised up. Before slashing her own wrists, Pitson had consumed an overdose of potent antihistamines. A note was reportedly found by her on a nearby dresser, conveying her regret for the disturbance, but warning Timothy of never being found. The message was urgently expressed as a way to convey to those who read it that Timothy was in good hands with people who would be willing to take care of him. But since his new guardians had hidden him from danger, it would not bring him back. The police were called, and upon closing the hotel room for forensic examination, they found the knife that Amy Pitson had used to take her own life. Upon inspecting her car, she discovered evidence of what seemed to be an excessive quantity of her son's blood. The knife that was found at the scene was analyzed, and it was determined that Amy's blood was the only evidence. Investigators were reassured by the Pitsons' close relatives, who disclosed that Timothy had suffered a significant nosebleed in the car before his disappearance, which is why so many trace particles were found in it. Amy Pitson's cell phone was not found at the scene of her death, but it was discovered on a grassy slope along Route 78, clearly thrown out of the window during the removal of vehicles she had taken back to Illinois. Her son's whereabouts were not revealed through the analysis of her cell records, nor did they provide any additional information on her actions or motives. Additionally, the examination of Amy's car indicated that she had been parked in a grassy area at some point. The vehicle's tires were found to have clay residue in them, which investigators speculated had been transported from a location with ponds or rivers nearby. It is highly likely that Amy had driven into a barren terrain, potentially on foot, to give Timothy to his new handlers. It has been clear from Pitson's statement that he thinks his son is still alive. Live PD, the police force drama that was canceled by the Sinks in August of 2018, displayed age progression images created by digital technology to depict Timothy's appearance at the age of 13. Angeline Hartman from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children was featured on that particular episode, where she appealed to the public for any information that could assist in the police finding Timothy. However, none of the calls made as a result were successful. Less than a year later, calls to the police in northern Kentucky offered an overwhelming sense of optimism for those hoping for Timothy's return, but also revealed details about an unsolvable and unspeakable sin. On April 3, 2019, residents of Newport contacted the police to report that a teenage boy had been seen wandering in the streets of nearby town, having crossed the Ohio River Bridge. Upon discovery, the police found the young man who was shaken, distraught, and worn out, and required extensive consolation before he could speak. When police asked the teenager for his name, they were left feeling a terrible silence as he gave it. Timothy. He let out a shiver of sorrow. Timothy Pitson, the Bourbon. The boy was hurriedly transported to Louisville, the most populous city in Kentucky, where he was interrogated by law enforcement regarding his supposed disappearance 8 years ago. The most he could remember was fleeing from a house in neighboring Ohio before running across the river bridge, according to his statement. James Pitson was deeply disappointed by the unexpected breakthrough in the case, as they revealed through DNA tests Timothy Pitson was not the boy. The entire story was a complex fabrication that was invented by Brian Michael Renee, who was 23 years old at the time. Just before his terrible claims, Renee was released from Belmont Correctional Institution in Ohio within a month. He had been indicted for burglary and vandalism, which were based on incidents committed in Medina County, but his time in jail was only 14 months. Sergeant Bill Rowley of Aurora Police issued a statement later on acknowledging that the case was not hoax and that they were still diligent in their search for Timothy as the unsolved matter of the missing person continues. It's impossible to imagine what Brian, Michael, and Renee would do if they were responsible for telling such a vicious lie. He may have witnessed a live PD episode or heard about Timothy's disappearance while in prison and had the opportunity to respond with an extraordinary level of contempt. Regardless, Timothy Pitson has not been seen since his mother's sudden disappearance, and there have been no sightings of the voice. Despite searching, no bodies have been discovered, including any uncomplicated cuts or injuries. It is possible that he is still present in the United States, waiting to be found. A group of 9 Soviet hikers departed on the 27th of January 1959 for the Ural mountain range in central Russia to participate in a hiking excursion that was organized to commemorate the 21st Congress of the Soviet Communist Party. The Ural Polytechnic Institute's 9 experienced hikers, who had completed ski tours and were enrolled in its elite program, are considered hardworking and highly intelligent. However, all 9 lost their lives in a tragic incident that occurred between the first and second weeks of February. Although the Russian government's recent investigation has dismissed the idea that the avalanche was a heroic event with no panic, there are still more alarming and covetous theories. Considering the Russian government's claim of a penchant for Moscow Rovka and the doctrine of denial and deception, it was reasonable to reject their assertions. The leader of the group, Igor Dyatlov, had promised to inform the head of their hiking club as soon as they arrived back in civilization before heading out for the Urals. They were supposed to return by the 12th of February, but Dyatlov made it clear that there was no need to worry if they were slightly behind schedule. The hiking group had not yet heard back by the 20th of February. Families started urging for the formation of a search team to ensure that their loved ones were not in peril and only delayed. The Ural Polytechnic Institute assembled a team of volunteers to create the initial search party for the Dyatlov group's supposed path, but their efforts were soon followed by military and law enforcement search teams due to the increasing danger in the operation. On February 26th, a search party discovered the initial indication of the Dyatlov group. The group's tent, which was abandoned and in disrepair, was discovered on the eastern side of the Hylets Yako mountain. Dead Mountain, a moniker that denotes the Hylets Yako and Mansi language, is known for its menacing demeanor in light of the Dyatlov tribe's destiny. The search party was frightened by the scene, as evidence showed that not only was the tent cut from inside, but almost everything in the group had been left behind, including their shoes. It is safe to assume that the Russian government's assertion of no panic during the incident is a complete fabrication. This calm, organized group smashed all they could to safety and fled into the deep snow with only their socks or boots. Not at all. The Dyatlov group was left with 9 sets of footprints, 1 each, as they departed from the tent. The trail was able to be followed within a mile of the area due to the cold and snowy conditions, leading to some nearby woods. The search party discovered evidence that the group had attempted to light a campfire to keep warm, but they were not far from the fire and only found the first 2 bodies of the missing hikers under 10 inches of Siberian pine. The only thing they had on was their underwear, and it wasn't just shoelaces. They found themselves lying under a tree that was broken up to 5 meters in height, and one of them had tried to climb it to either find something or flee from someone or something. The search team discovered 3 more bodies, including the head of the group, Igor Dyatlov, in the area between the pines and where they would set up their camp. The corpses were lying motionless, as if they had been returning to the location where their tent was placed. The Dyatlov group's 4 other bodies were discovered months later. A pine tree with broken branches was found in a ravine that was less than 10 meters away from the 4-meter snow. Strangely, one of them was wearing trousers that were burned, either as fuel for the campfire or for some other reason. Due to their relatives' requests, the Soviet justice system initiated a comprehensive legal inquiry immediately after the discovery of the first 5 bodies. A small crack in the skull of one hiker was discovered, but the medical examiner determined that it was not a fatal injury and confirmed that all 5 individuals examined had died from hypothermia. The belief was that the medical examiners would arrive at comparable conclusions for the other 4 corpses, but upon their discovery and examination, the story became much more spine-chilling. The medical examiners determined that 3 of the 4 bodies found in the forest ravine were fatal due to injuries. A skull was severely damaged, and 2 other individuals sustained severe chest injuries caused by forces that resembled those produced by a car accident. Once again, the bodies lacked any external injuries that are typically linked to bone fractures, which seemed as if they had all been subjected to an extremely intense stressor, such as from a massive explosion. The 4 bodies had soft tissue damage, with tongues missing, eyes gouged out, and lips sliced off. A few individuals had their eyebrows amputated or had lost some of their skull bone. The forensic scientists determined that the soft tissue wounds were caused by the discovery of the corpses in a stream located at the forest floor, but this has been challenged by numerous individuals. The 4 individuals were aware that hiding in a stream would worsen the hypothermia. In the early stages of the inquiry, there was wild speculation that the group had been attacked by the Mansi tribe, who were indigenous to the area. The Mansi people, who have been residing in the Ural Mountains for centuries, are known for their strong-arm tendencies towards protecting their sacred territories from Russian invasions that led to the persecution of their native people. Several Mansi tribesmen were apprehended and subjected to questioning by Russian law enforcement officials, who still maintain that they were accused of attacking and murdering the group for invading their territories. Eventually, the allegations were dismissed due to the lack of evidence of an apparent physical altercation between the corpses. Over the years, there has been a great deal of curiosity about 2 issues that have never been adequately clarified. Before the investigations were restricted to top-secret archives, there was no information available about the Hygars and Turner organs' condition. Their injuries were only described as occurring on the outside of their bodies and bones, not inside their internal organs. What was concealed about the Soviets' wounds? One of the Hygars' clothing was found to contain a significant amount of radiation exposure, making it an interesting piece of information. The Russian government has remained silent on this matter, although it is mentioned several times in the following investigative report, and they have not offered any explanation or probed why. Yura Dukuntsevich, who later became the leader of the Dyatlov Foundation, attended 5 Hygars' funerals and is one of only 2 people to describe this aspect of their case. He remembered that their skin was a deep brown hue. The exhumation of one of the Hygars' remains was carried out in April of 2018, following a request from journalists for permission from Reuters and BBC. The analysis of the body's DNA left people in a state of disbelief. It was disclosed that the DNA did not appear to resemble any of the living Hygars, leading journalists to speculate that someone else may have taken on the identity of those individuals. A book called The Price of State Secrets, His 9 Lives, published in 1990, is another source worth reading about the Dyatlov affair. The publication coincided with the Soviet Union's disintegration and the disclosure of many of its old secrets. It posited that the Hygars were killed as part of a secret Soviet weapon experiment. It is highly likely that the high level of radiation detected on one of the deceased Hygars' clothing could be accounted for. Many who had previously refrained from disclosing their involvement in the incident came forward with new and startling revelations. A former police officer, who oversaw the official inquest in 1959, acknowledged that the investigated team had no logical basis for the incident. He mentioned that his team had reported seeing spheres that were flying after. Direct orders from high-ranking regional officials directed him to retract the claim and forget about what he had seen that night. During the night of the incident, Another Hagari group, who were hiking approximately 30 miles south of Kuala Lumpur Mountain, supported the flying sphere's point. They stated that they had witnessed unusual orange spheres in the sky located to the north of the subject night. In February and March of 1959, strange spherical shapes were observed by various witnesses in the nearby town of Isdal, including the Soviet military and its official meteorology service. It was expected that high-ranking members of the political apparatus would not reveal what they had seen, and they only revealed it in the 90s when it was safe to do so. The Russian government has cited an avalanche as the official explanation for the incident, but there is substantial evidence that contradicts this claim. Evidence suggests that the area where the incident occurred did not display any indication of an avalanche. Debris had been spread around the area, and there were clear patterns that would have resulted from an avalanche. A shallow layer of snow covered the bodies that were found in the first month of the event. These bodies would have been swept away if there was an avalanche that had the potential to wipe out the second party. The process would have resulted in more severe injuries and caused significant harm to the nearby tree line. Despite the possibility of an avalanche, the analysis of the terrain and slope revealed that it would have escaped the hikers' campsite. No avalanche conditions have been detected in any of the 100 or more expeditions made to the area since 1959. A study utilizing modern terrain-focused geographical techniques revealed that the likelihood of an avalanche was extremely low at this location. Only in April and May did the snowfalls of winter become dangerous as they melted. There were no such conditions during the incident that took place in February. With the available information at our disposal, it is safe to assume that the official explanation does not add up. The occurrence of an avalanche is highly unlikely, and there are numerous strange and frightening details that make it impossible for anyone to believe. The first set of bodies were not difficult to find, and considering the proximity of the last 4 bodies to the original campsite, they would have been found eventually, especially during the late spring and summer when the snow begins to thaw. What was the reason behind the Soviet military's decision to participate in the search? It's clear that the answer is yes. They were aware of the happenings around Kholat-Syokle and only came to conceal their true intentions. According to the 1990 book by Anatoly Gushkin, the title implies that human lives were worth more than the cost of Soviet secrets. Nathan Luna, who was born on October 21, 1965 in New York City, to a Filipino father and an African-American mother, spent his formative years in the Patterson Housing Project near Yankee Stadium in Brooklyn, New York. John made his parents feel as much pride as possible. Besides being the initial generation to attend college, we are also earning a first-class undergraduate degree in law from Fordham University. He and Reggie Shufford, his roommate at the University of North Carolina School of Law, moved in together. Who is the future executive director of the ACLU of Pennsylvania? Luna was employed at Arnold & Porter in Washington, D.C., and the Federal Trade Commission during the 90s, where she worked as a prosecutor in the Brooklyn borough of New York City before moving to Baltimore, Maryland to work as an assistant United States attorney. Angela Hopkins, an obstetrician, got married to her husband on August 29, 1993, and they had 2 children together. They were the modern nuclear family, leading a life of happiness for many years. Then a tragedy struck, which would raise many questions in the years to come. As an assistant United States attorney in Oak Ridge, Baltimore, Jonathan's primary focus during his time there was the noble task of bringing to justice those violent predators who committed atrocious offenses. The morning of December 4, 2003, saw Jonathan leaving his home to head to the office. 2 individuals suspected of trafficking heroin from their record label studios, known as Stash House Records, were the focus of his involvement in the case. A homicide charge was also being faced by one of these men. Jonathan worked all day and well into the evening on a plea deal about to be offered to one of the accused drug dealers, before calling his colleague at approximately 9 p.m. that night saying he was just about ready to go home. The office's timekeeping indicated that Jonathan didn't leave until 20 minutes before midnight, and he left his prescription glasses at home. Luna's trip to Delaware at approximately 1 in the morning involved the withdrawal of $200 from an ATM machine, as evidenced by CCTV footage and credit card records. Afterward, he drove from New Jersey to Pennsylvania and utilized his credit card to withdraw cash from a bank. Luna's pass was clearly used, but he had to make a shift after entering Delaware and purchasing toll tickets. A worker from Sensine Negan v. DJ Weaver, a well drilling firm in Denver, Pennsylvania, saw he had seen something up behind the main building the next morning at about 5:30. He observed that blood had been smeared onto the front passenger's door, and a small pool of blood was present on the back seat. The inside of the car was covered in bloodied cash. The drilling worker immediately contacted the police, who were then tasked with searching the area for Jonathan and eventually finding his body in a nearby creek. He had been stabbed more than 30 times and inflicted his own penknife, after which he was subjected to knife cuts to his throat and genitals. The cause of death was drowning, as she fell into the creek. Investigators concluded that Luna had sustained the majority of his injuries while seated in the back seat, which was covered in blood. The police discovered fingerprints and unidentified blood in the blood, indicating that Luna had been present before his death and had resisted being attacked. This is the point where the case becomes extremely peculiar. The death was initially determined to be an obvious homicide, as the attacker who assaulted Jonathan had initially been disarmed by his own knife before using it to kill him. The pathologist was ordered by an FBI agent to undergo a post-mortem, which could result in him being charged with suicide by chance. Luna's involvement in the theft of $36,000 was part of a series of strange rumors that circulated throughout the media. An anonymous source informed the Baltimore Sun reporter that Luna was scared of the possibility of being found dead, but no evidence to support this claim. Luna's case against a network of violent predators, some of whom were employed by high-ranking federal officials, was supported by substantial evidence. It is possible that the investigation led to his assassination, and why would an FBI agent have been deemed responsible for his own death? Although the motives for the murder of a respectable man may remain unknown, it is apparent that no one has ever been found guilty or held accountable for his involvement in the incident. The abundance of forensic evidence suggests disturbing implications. Certainly,